Hello, everyone. My name is Jeanette Shaliga, and we are celebrating VGA's 7th birthday. Up next, we've got the wonderful Jean Wilcox Hibben, and she is going to be sharing the envelope, please. Finding family in the post. I'm really excited about this topic. Go ahead, Jean, take it away.
You. Well, I have to tell you that I absolutely love the concept of opening the mail and finding something about my family. Now, it doesn't have the same feel as it used to, but it's kind of fun. I mean, once upon a time, before there was email, there was real mail. And what a wonderful thing. The acronym S, was it SASE, self-addressed stamped envelope? Yeah, those letters mean nothing to people that were well, people that were anything more than maybe 20 years old. I mean, less than 20 years old, probably have no idea what the SASE means. And I had a lot of SASEs I sent out there to various places. But I want to talk a little bit about the mail that was sent by our ancestors and by different companies, perhaps too, because not everyone had ancestors that wrote letters. On the other hand, a lot of people got letters from folks that weren't friends and weren't ancestors, but may have been, well, it could be a legal team getting in touch with them, or it could be an advertisement, or who knows what all. And a lot of people kept those things. Now, I know a lot of people didn't. In my family, both sides, my father's side and my mother's side, nobody understood what a wastebasket was. So that means all the letters were saved. Sometimes they were sorted, sometimes they weren't. And I'm not going to tell you all about all of the different ones they had, but here's what I want to talk to you about. However, the mail is received, it's often coupled with good things, especially for family historians. And I don't mean any offense to any of our ancestors, but even bad news coming is oftentimes helpful for the genealogist. Well, I want you to feel free to email me with any questions that you might have after this is over and we don't have time to get to them. By all means, do email them to me. Today, our delivery is going to cover some definitions, a brief history of mail delivery, very brief, and letter correspondence, and ways of dating material, and that's my main focus. Hints for using the information to locate documentation. Contact with family by our immigrant ancestors was really limited, especially if those immigrant ancestors lived in other countries from the maybe where your ancestors ended up here, and yet the more distant family was overseas somewhere. And that's the case with my family. A lot of my family's from Germany, so not of the envelopes and letters I have come from Germany. And I should also add that my family does not have as many envelopes in the collections. And I was thinking about that last night. Why don't we have more envelopes? Well, obviously, envelopes may have gotten torn or harder to read or whatever because of the use and the number of people handling it. But it's also possible that the family said, "Oh, look, here's a stamp, and our cousin collects stamps." And so instead of just trying to take the stamp off the envelope, they just handed the envelope to whoever the stamp collectors were, and yet they kept the letters. So that does happen sometimes. If we know a little bit about the history of the United States mail, it'll help us determine the time period of the correspondence, and that's aided by understanding what all the letters and numbers mean, most of them being on that envelope. To date, we're going to talk about dating correspondence. Now, I want to point out that if a word or an acronym that's written up in a letter, for instance, did not exist at a particular time, then your ancestor probably did not use it unless it was by accident, or if they had a time machine. Etymology dictionaries usually date words to a particular time period and are assessed by the language from which a word is derived, plus the first time it appears in print, for example, in a work of Shakespeare. Now, when I say in print, I don't mean just in somebody's letter, but when it was printed for some sort of publication, so it's gotten a little more popularity or recognition. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some frequently used acronyms that you might find in the letters that your ancestors wrote. RFD stood for Rural Free Delivery, still does. RR is Rural Route. COD is Cash on Delivery. That's what Amazon doesn't do. PO is PO Post Office, and oftentimes is added to the word box, PO Box. APO is Army or Air Force Post Office, and FPO is Fleet or Navy Post Office. So when you see these, knowing what those are. By the way, the handout does have a glossary of the terms and the acronyms. Keeping in mind, some phrases may be applied to ancestral mail and its delivery, but not all of these are still in use. So you might see the word aerogram. I don't think I've seen that in anything in recent years at all, but sometimes airmail or par avion, general delivery, indicia, mail. Talk about the word mail. I've been using it a number of times so far. The word mail is from the French mail, but spelled M-A-L-E. And it means a sack or a wallet or a bag. And in the 1650s, a mail of letters would be a sack of letters, but that was metamorphosed into the word mail being the letters and sent overseas. The domestic mail was called post, and I'll talk to you a moment about post. Just give me a few moments here. Well, mail order, star route, post bag, post code, post response, post haste, postmark, post paid, post road. My goodness sakes, everything says post. Well, that's domestic mail. But why do we use the word post? So take a quick look at that. Way back in the time before people had, in some cases, the ability to read, there were fewer people were literate, or just because they didn't want to publish everything because it costs money, so we would use a town crier. I have friends that are town criers. Yes, today. And the town crier would announce to the villagers and say, here's the news, here's who's doing what. Most often that had to do with news that was being broadcast from locations that were not local. Now, after the town crier has made all this announcement, now he still has the piece of paper or the scroll or whatever he's been reading it from. Now, what's he going to do with it? Certainly not everybody can read it, as I said, but some people can, and some people may have been late and didn't get there in time for the whole thing. And so then that particular piece of paper would be stuck on a post so that others could read it whenever they got around to it. So the notice is nailed to a doorpost or an indoor, and that's where we got the word post, meaning to post a notice, and later post office, and today post on the internet. So we're still using the word post, and it has gone a long way from where it started. Well, we need to know the numbers. So let's look at mail by the numbers. We went from having zones to having ZIP, which means Zone Improvement Plan. And then we went back to zone, and not exactly, but we added 4 more digits. And we'll talk briefly about those. Mostly, we're going to talk about those first 2. What do the numbers mean? And when were the zones implemented? Because that's going to give us an idea of when the letter was written. When were zip codes implemented? Also, that'll give us a hint about how old is the letter and when was it written. But in what years were each used? The 1943 zones were implemented, and they started with just 2 digits. In 1963, The ZIP, or Zone Improvement Plan, was instituted when the quantity of zone numbers became unmanageable. That makes sense. Initially, they were used for government and businesses, but then it was expanded to the general public. And by the late 1960s, the zip code use was common. Now, I remember when zip codes came into play, and I remember some of my relatives, actually my grandfather in particular, complaining about it. Now we got to have more numbers. In 1983, the +4 was implemented. I didn't realize it. That was a long time ago, and a lot of people really fought that one and still don't use it. Now, sometimes zip codes get changed. So I did a little bit of research into that, and that's of course going to be based on time frame and on location as to whether or not you've got the same zip code now as your family did in the same household back in say 1970 something. All right. Well, I want to hopefully recognize right now that we have the 62nd birthday of Zip. So what do these numbers mean? And by the way, if you're going to have a party for the zip code implementation, please invite me. I like to go to parties, obviously. All right, the first position of the zip code is the general geographic location from the Northeast, and I'm looking at United States here, from the Northeast to the far west. The second and third positions are the location of the central post office facility of the region. And the fourth and fifth positions are the location of smaller post offices or zones for given addresses. And I was looking at a zip code that my husband and I had back in the 1980s, and then it changed in about 1998 or something like that. And I double checked it, and essentially the change only related to whatever the governing post office was. Now, I'm from Illinois, so I was curious about the zip code 61802. The 6 means that's from the central United States. 18 is the central post office, and in this case, it's Urbana. And the 02 is for the local post office, and in this case, it's Sunnycrest. So if they change what the post office location is that's going to be doing that final distribution, then we'd see a change in the zip code. But we also have to know our ABCs. So in October of 1963, our state abbreviations officially went from 3 or more letters to 2. Why? Well, we needed room for the zip code. Knowing the abbreviations will help determine where letters came from. For example, capital I, small a, one with a period, once meant Indiana. Today, capital I, capital A is Iowa. Between 1931 and 1963, we could see people getting kind of confused about what IA is, which places, and that's not to be confused with AI, which is something completely different. So we also note that there are supposed to be periods put in before 1963. Of course, a lot of people didn't, or that sounds, in my family, that sounds just like my family. For example, in California, I'm from California, and in 1831, well, there wasn't a code thing here, but in 1874, the abbreviation became CAL, period. In 1943, it was expanded to CALIF, period. In June of 1963, it became capital CALIF, no period. In October, same year, it was pushed to just the capital C, capital A, and like I said up there, that it's making room now for the zip codes. So how can we use this? Well, we can look at the cancellation stamp on an envelope also, and that'll give us location, date, and in this particular example here, even the political climate. If you can take a look at that, this is recognizing the final reunion of the United Confederate Veterans. I don't think we'd see this stamp in our governmental mail at all. This particular missive was sent from a Wisconsin post office to another post office, both of them being in Union states. So let's take a look here. I look at the back, and that's where the return address is on this envelope, and it tells me that it's from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, is where it says where the return address is. But when I look at the postmark says Chicago. And the first question people might have for that is, well, but if it says that the return address is in Wisconsin and yet the postmark is Chicago, what's the problem here? Well, the problem is probably recognizing the text. The chances are that this was sent from somebody who is lived in Wisconsin but had gone to Chicago, Illinois, maybe on a trip or to visit someone or attend a funeral or a wedding, and was sending the letter but didn't want to put a Chicago return address because if it got returned, it more likely should go to the sender's address, which is in Wisconsin. So dating can also be aided by the specific address itself. So this particular letter was sent to Miss M.E. Hollander. And in fact, there's two letters to her. And it's sent in one, it says Milwaukee 11, Wisconsin, and then the other just says Milwaukee, Wisconsin. But you might notice that it's got two different street addresses, 694 Farwell as opposed to 2852 North Farwell. Just because there is a different address does not necessarily mean it's a different location. If I go to do a little Googling about the city of Milwaukee, which is both of these are to Milwaukee, I would find that indeed there were some address conversions and they changed all the numbering. So Miss M.E. Hollander did not move from one location on Farwell to another, both same house. It's just after the street numbers were changed. And then I can look at the post office to give me an idea of when this was sent, because there's going to be a little difference in denomination. I'll show you that in just a moment. But my main focus is if you've got the letters from your ancestors, you want to save the envelope, okay? Because cancellation imprint, addresses, postage, and stamps can help with dating correspondence and locating other documents. Well, let's talk a little bit about money and mail because, boy, I tell you, you say, well, have you sent a letter? Well, I tried, but I don't remember. I don't know what the postage is. It changes every time I turn around. Well, it wasn't always quite that fast in changing the amount of money. The first stamps were hand stamped onto a piece of mail because there wasn't, they didn't have an envelope, right? And they arrived COD, and they were paid then on delivery. But then we got to prepaid postage. In London, the penny post is popular in the 1680s, 1 cent. And then in America, we said, hey, that's a cool idea. We're going to do that too, somewhere down the line. These stamps were in perforated sheets in the mid-1800s. The penny blacks is what they were called, had adhesive on the back. So how much did it cost? Well, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. It's on your handout. Before 1847, the cost was determined by the distance. How far away is this? And then changes came about after 1847. The costs were elevated for heavier or larger letters. And then there were ship fees added for mail coming from overseas. So the cost of first class for our ancestors, it goes up and down and up and down. 1863, it's 3 cents a half ounce, 6 cents an ounce, and then in 83, 2 cents a half ounce and 4 cents an ounce. When do we ever see the post office lowering the postage? At 1885, it goes down more. It's 2 cents for an ounce. Well, then it starts going up from there and continues to go up. And I haven't looked today, but last time I sent something, I had to double check, and indeed, yes, it had. So, but that is another way to date the correspondence. Look at the postage stamp denominations. And more dealing with postcards. Postcards are less than first class, but they also go up and down, and it depends on whether there's a pre-stamp on the postcard or if it is one that you put a stamp on. All right, here's a letter that was sent to my grandfather. His name was L.A. Wilcox, and this postmark it's hard to read, though. It's from Dallas, Texas. I can see that, and 27th of March says, but is that 1963 or 65 or 66 or 68 or 69? It's really hard to tell. So I'm going to do a little bit of investigation here, because the zip code's going to tell me it was after 1963. This was sent in March, and the 6 and the 7, which are the first numbers, the number for the Texas zip code and the number for the Illinois zip code, are 6 and 7. So that tells me it's from the middle of the country. If I couldn't have read that it said Texas, I might not be able to read that. I'm not sure what that looks like. All right. The state abbreviations that are on here are outdated. Well, not everybody has adapted. The 5 cents plus a 1 cent, 6-cent stamps tell us it was going to be sent in 1968 or later. So I've got a little bit more information here, so I can forget about the 1963, 65, 66. It's going to be 68 or later. And then when I take a closer look at it, it says March. My grandfather died on April 6th, I think it was, April 4th, rather, in 1968. So I've got that narrowed down, and I know when this was sent. Why not just call? That's a good question. I mean, we pick up the phones and we call. We don't even think about it. We just call. Well, it wasn't always that way, was it? A call over 4 miles was considered long distance, and a long distance operator was needed. Hence, it cost more. A 1 or 2 cent postcard could get information into the recipient's hand across town, often in less than a day. Seriously. Because until 1950, mail that came via postal carrier was delivered twice a day. And I remember, I don't remember 1950 because I wasn't alive yet, but I remember walking that road down to the family mailbox in Wisconsin, and my grandmother complaining about how I used to take this walk twice a day because the mail was delivered twice a day. And of course, that didn't sound logical to me at all, but I was a little kid. What did I know? Because of frequent deliveries, often a letter or a card will give just the time and or day of the week. We'll be there on Friday. Well, I look at that like Friday of what month, of what year? Now, for locations where delivery was not available or feasible, recipients had to go to town to pick up their mail. In many towns, the post office was the social hub and often housed with the mercantile or sometimes with the railway station. Now, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail here, but I will tell you that this is where people connected with folks, whether they were there in person or they were mailing their missives. But, you know, in 1890, nearly 41 million people, that's 65% of the American population, lived in rural areas. Now, many city dwellers were getting this free delivery, but the people that lived in the outskirts, they wanted to have delivery to their homes too. They didn't have time to go into the post office, and so eventually it was set up where mail delivery started to come to people's homes, and the roads were built and improved. So when we're on some of the roads that we travel, a lot of them were post roads and began their existence because the post office needed to get the RFD, the rural free delivery, out to the residents. In fact, not far from where I live, there is a post road. It's still called post road. Well, who's who? We want to compare the letter to the envelope to figure this out. You know, so many families have nicknames. My family just loved nicknames, apparently, and almost everyone had them except me, which may be a good thing. Want to clarify the names found in the newspapers, the journals and diaries, and the census schedules, and, well, wherever. And letters can often help us do this. Usually the envelope would include the Christian name or the legal name of the people, but a letter might have just the nickname. And that's, let me show you what I'm talking about. Here we have some letters back and forth between my grandmother and her sister. And her sister's name was Mamie Hollander. That was Miss M.E. Hollander. And she was called Tully by the family. And she called her sister Lala, which is my grandmother. The letters, the envelopes, however, have their legal names written on them. Now, my mother was Virginia Johnson Wilcox, and she apparently had a lot of nicknames that I never heard of before. Ginger and Ginny and Ginger Snap, my mom? Well, that sounds really weird to me. But in all cases, the letter was sent to Mrs. Virginia Wilcox. Now, my mom, when she did keep the envelope, helped me to figure out who is actually getting the letter and connect the nicknames to the legal names. My granduncle Harrison was Mouser to his wife, and he was called Kiddo by him. And I heard them say this back and forth. I had no idea what they were talking about, but I got a hold of some of their love letters, actually, and it always had their legal name on the envelope. And you're going to ask them, but why aren't there letters among my family's estate papers? Well, not all families kept correspondence. Some folks hid or destroyed written communication. They don't want to have anyone see that. Or letters your family sent to others may be in the collections of the recipients. In fact, that's most logical. If they're all in the same family, that helps. Depending on a number of variables, literacy was not a given, and often a neighbor or other individual was asked to read and write on behalf of the family, so you might not actually see your ancestors' handwriting. Letters are still the genealogist's friends, so consider this. If you have letters from family friends, or from relatives, can you locate them or their descendants? I've got a collection of letters from the Ypsilanti Historical Society, and they were all sent by one of my ancestors in New York. So all these letters were kept by the family in Michigan, because Michigan, the family was well known, respected, and their house was actually on the historical house register. So all these letters are there, and they deal with all my family because they came from the father and the brothers and sisters and friends and cousins, all from New York. And thankfully, a very nice genealogist got them for me. And then I went to Ypsilanti and found a few more. So if you've got some of those letters, can you find the people that maybe were talked about in them? I bet they'd love to have those letters, or copies, of course. If so, wouldn't they like to read of what their ancestors, maybe some bragging or listing more people and genealogical information? So get them copies, post haste. Letters tell more than family dynamics. The history of a city and the genesis of mail delivery go hand in hand. Track the post office, and you can track the progress of a community. To find the documents from the correspondence, use the postage stamp denomination and image. Use the postmark dates, the cancellations. Use to and from address info from the zone or the zip numbers, or the location of streets and numbers. Date abbreviations. The USPS continues to help researchers find family the old-fashioned way, which is how I started out doing it. And I'm trying to figure out, what am I going to do with all these self-addressed stamped envelopes I had ready to go send people? I'll find out something. And there we have it. If you have questions, I'd be happy to answer if I can.